Good morning to everyone, and thanks so much for joining us on this gorgeous sunny day. Thanks to Takshnet Watershed Council for partnering with LCC on this presentation, and special thanks to those teachers at Kluane who were expressing interest in Lynx and giving us that idea to share this research. And of course, special thanks to our friends in the Yukon who are sharing their research with us. Do you know if the teachers are on? I'll check. Oh, yep, they are. Hi, Tracy. Great, the Kluane School is with us. So I'm going to introduce Liam now. Liam Horne is an ecology research technician with most of his experience involving the ecology of terrestrial mammals. He just literally started an MSc project. I hope he'll tell us about that, studying black bear predation on caribou calves in northern Alberta, Canada. However, for the past 1.5 years, he's been continually living and working in beautiful Kluane, Yukon territories, collecting data on Canada lynx and snowshoe hare ecology. Through a short presentation, he will share with us some of the recent advancements in biologging technology that give new insights into lynx and snowshoe hare behavior throughout the peaks and declines of the famous lynx hare cycle. Thank you so much, Liam, for joining us and educating us today.
I'll do my best with it. Thank you for having me.
So I'm seeing for your screen, I'm seeing your whole screen, not just the individual photos.
Yeah, I can put that up. Yeah, I'll get that going whenever, as long as everyone's ready, I can.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so let me just start from the beginning.
Is there anything you want to say before you start?
Excuse me. Can you give us just like 1 second? We're like right in the middle of transferring students. Mr. Hart is setting it up in his room.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Sure, not a problem, Tracy.
If you could
no worries at all.
2 minutes. Thank you. We kind of got a few things going on crazy. Students just finished up snack, COVID testing, you know, all those.
Not a problem, Tracy. I'm glad you could join us.
I'm glad that you invited us. Thank you so much. So I have my computer on, but I'm waiting for Eric to turn his on in his classroom so he can show it on the big screen.
Okay, great.
And I see so many other people. Yay.
I know, for a sunny Tuesday morning, we're doing great. Are you having nice aurora in the Yukon over there, Liam? Or I guess you're down in.
I'm down south now. Yeah, I'm in Calgary, which is a bit of a wake-up call. We were having beautiful aurora all winter in the Yukon, and then now there's no snow on the ground here. It's complete springtime, summer even, some might call it. So it's I'm missing the snow already.
It's gorgeous here.
Yeah.
And the aurora's been amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I guess Liz was telling me that it's getting pretty springtime over there as well. Right when I left the Yukon, we were having those warm days, so I'm sure the snow melts pretty quick.
Nice.
And you'll be seeing the budding plants in no time.
Right. It looks like we're having a few more people signing on right now anyway, so good to have a little bit of a delay.
Well, hi, all the kids are in the room now, so I'm going to turn my computer off. Thank you.
Fantastic. I will mute myself and stop my video, and if the other participants want to just mute themselves and stop their videos, then that will be great, and we'll turn it over to Liam. Thank you so much, Liam.
Okay, so I can just get going then. Whenever? Okay, well, I'll take that as a yes because everyone's. Yep, so. So yeah, thank you, Jessica. My name's Liam. I was the head field technician for the Kluane Lynx project for the past year and a half. This might be a bit longer than a short presentation, so we'll have to see about that. But yeah, so I'm going to give you a little talk about the lynx hair research that we've been doing for the past 6-ish years in the Kluane Valley. So yeah, no, Jessica introduced me very nicely, so it's just me. I've worked mostly with terrestrial mammals, but a little bit with some other stuff. Yeah, so I live at Kluane Lake. We were just talking about Aurora. Here's another beautiful display. So I live just down the airstrip from the research station, if any of you have ever been out that way. And it's beautiful and I love it and it's my home. But most of our research happens, I don't know, about 30-minute drive away, 20-minute drive away. If you've ever heard of Squirrel Camp, it's kind of around that area, in between Haines Junction and Kluane Lake. So another beautiful spot, very lucky to be able to work there. So I know we got I know you guys all are probably quite familiar with Canada Lynx, but felt like it'd be good to give a bit of a background on them anyway. So here we have Canada Lynx. This is a family group that was actually living right by my house in the winter of 2019, 2020. So Lynx canadensis is its scientific name. As I'm sure you're all aware, it's got some pretty distinct features. Got the ear tufts, the beards, pretty classic kind of salt and pepper, brown and black coat. Not a huge difference between males and females in terms of appearance, but some minor weight differences. Males would probably average around, I don't know, maybe like 10 to 14 kilograms, whereas a female would be around 8 to 12 kilograms. But the classic feature would be these massive paws. And so their toe pads themselves actually aren't that big. It's mostly fur, but when they're spread out, just like they are in this picture here, it helps them walk on top of snow or sink in very minimally. So they're very cool, very well adapted to their environment. And just a quick stuff, a little bit about their range. So obviously they have a northern distribution in the boreal forest. In southern populations, where their numbers are low and lynx are more rare, and also maybe a bit more threatened, the populations don't fluctuate very wildly. But obviously, when you get up into the northern ecosystems and the northern boreal, that's when you get those population cycles, big fluctuations of both lynx and snowshoe hare. And just for fun, because I'm in Calgary now, this is my best friend's mom growing up, lives about 2 minutes away, had this in her backyard. This is the other type of lynx, Lynx rufus, also known as the bobcat. And they're becoming more urbanized in Calgary. But as you can see, they look quite a bit different. They're spotted, they're a lot smaller. And they do have a bit of overlap in their home ranges, but are very differently adapted to different environments. So here's again the Canada Lynx forepaw, very large, helps them walk in snow, versus the bobcat forepaw, which is just for walking. It's just a normal cat paw, it looks like. So you can't talk about Canada Lynx without talking about snowshoe hare, scientific name Lepus americanus. So again, just some brief stuff about them. They change to brown in the summertime and white in the winter, as you all know. And they actually change coats in the kind of reverse. They change from brown from the bottom. I can't remember which way, but they go from the bottom to the top of their bodies from winter to spring, and then they change the reverse way in the fall, which is pretty cool. Anyway, they kind of have similar adaptations to lynx in terms of large feet, large hind legs, allows them to move quickly and stay on top of the snowpack for the most part. Usually ranging around 1 to 2 kilograms. Females are a bit bigger than males. Just some examples of some snowshoe hare tracks there. I always think it's cool when you get a good print like on the right of a snowshoe hare and it almost looks like a predator. You can see their toe pads all spread out and you can see their claws sometimes. So I think that's really cool. So the snowshoe hare and why it's so important, it's what we call a keystone species. And really all that means is that there's a lot of things in the boreal ecosystem that eat snowshoe hare, as well as the snowshoe hare eats a lot of things. So basically the gist of it is that if you removed snowshoe hare from the ecosystem, it would look vastly different than it is today, because it is so essential and key to the ecosystem functioning. So here's just a classic diagram. Oh, sorry about that. Just showing historical data from fur trapping data. It just shows, it's one of the ways to show that this has been going on a long time, as well as traditional knowledge knows that this has been going on a long time. But it's pretty cool to see that it's maintained its relative 10-year cycle consistently. And so this is the data that's been collected in the Kluane region since the mid-1970s, starting with people like Charlie Krebs, who you may or may not have heard of. Our very own Liz Hofer was involved in this project for many years. And so every spring, they do a census on 3 control grids that are 36, so they're 600 meters by 600 meters. And that trapping in the spring, because you don't want the juveniles to inflate the estimations of population size, is what's been happening consistently on those same grids since the mid-1970s. And as you can see, you have these beautiful population cycles going from peaks to very low lows. And here we are in 2021. The data is not plotted yet, but it's even worse than it was last year in terms of hair numbers. So we're in the lowest of the low right now. So when you put, why do I just feel like, I don't know if you guys can see this or not. Anyway, so here when we put we overlap it with some predator track transects that we do. So we have lynx and coyote densities on here as well. And yeah, so you can see that the lynx numbers pretty closely follow the cycles of the hare population numbers. So these are pretty classic examples that I'm sure a lot of you have seen. The coyotes obviously cycle to some extent as well, but that's just not what we're focusing on today. Some things to point out are that the lynx peaks are usually around 1 to 2 years lag behind the hare peak. And so this kind of has to do with hunting efficiency. As the hare densities are at the peak, the lynx hunting efficiency is quite high. So then they can kill and eat a lot of snowshoe hare, which drives the snowshoe hare numbers down. But the lynx don't really feel the effects of those snowshoe hare numbers decreasing until a couple years later, when their hunting efficiency takes a big enough hit that they either have to start moving to new areas or they start starving to death, which is unfortunate, but it does happen. Another note is around the 2012 area, that part of the low, when the hare population crashed just like it usually does, the lynx population did not crash as much as it typically does. And that's really interesting. There's not really a clear answer onto why that is yet. And that's part of what they're looking at. They're always trying to figure out what the different little tiny differences and stuff mean. But so that's not really been explained very well yet. And then moving up to present day, as you can see, the lynx numbers are starting to crash as well, just behind the hare numbers. Our peak was around 2017, 2018 for the hares, and then for the lynx around 2017 to 2019. And so these numbers, based on 2021, the predator track transects show that the lynx numbers haven't actually decreased that much. I don't know, I was around for the past 2 winters, and based on what I've seen, I would say that the lynx numbers did decrease quite a bit, either through dispersal or death by starvation. But yeah, so there's a bit of a disparity between the track transect numbers and what I was seeing on the landscape and our trapping success as well. So I have a couple ideas about why these numbers could potentially be inflated, but it's all somewhat speculative right now. So getting into the meat of it now, and please cut me off if I run over time here. So here we have a Canada lynx, obviously, with ear tags and collar. So the collar I will explain later, and the ear tags we use to identify individual lynx. This is important, just so that when we deploy cameras and stuff like that, we can see who is coming around. Yeah, so we've deployed since the winter of 2015, 2016. We've deployed, I think, around 130 collars on somewhere between 40 to 50 individual lynx. I don't have those exact numbers, but I did a quick calculation. So yeah, the bit of the nitty gritty of the trapping is we have these pretty makeshift PVC traps, box traps that we use, and they look not like much, but they work most of the time. This year was a bit of a different story, but so yeah, we take snowmobile and truck out, and we haul these traps around, and we deploy them in different locations with bait, and it's yeah, so we use bait and lures and try and bring in the lynx. We have trail cameras on or in the past, we've had trail cameras on most of our traps, and recently we haven't had it as often just because of logistical things. But so sometimes the lynx will come up and sniff it and go in, and sometimes they don't. This one, I don't believe went in. Sometimes we have a lynx. This is a famous lynx named Fish. We give them fun names. He's an escape artist, so most of the time the lynx are pretty mellow once they get in the traps, but he has definitely figured out how to get out of them most of the time. So we have special traps just for him. This was not one of them. So he basically just wiggles his way out or throws his paws into the gate until it pops up a bit. And this is just a funny photo sequence of him escaping. This is the lynx named Fish again. Our trap is just out of frame on the left here. And so sometimes they're just completely indifferent. Doesn't even look in the direction. He just looks in the exact opposite way in a couple seconds here. Yep, there he is. But pretty cool video regardless. Beautiful single ice mountains in the background. And sometimes we catch animals we don't want to catch. So here's a wolverine being incredibly smart. Just flips on its back and throws open our gate. And we've had wolverines before that just rip open our traps to get the bait, but this one, the very first time it showed up on camera, it just figured that out instantly. And it did that about 10 to 15 times throughout the night, just going in and out and eating our bait and leaving, like coming in, eating the bait, leaving, and then coming back and eating it more. That's pretty cool. So then we eventually catch a lynx. Here's a lynx named Al Capone. Sometimes they look pretty grumpy like he does. Sometimes they are pretty much indifferent. This is Barb. And sometimes we catch two in the same trap. So this is Arwen and Lizzie, and this is not the first time we've caught them in the same trap. It seems to be based on the cameras and based on the prints. Usually one of them goes in and sits down, and then the other one goes in and sits down inside, and then both of them sit there for a bit. And then eventually one of them goes and steps on the pedal. So it's pretty funny. So we get them, we put them in a crate. This is pretty just a funny picture. We cover them up with a blanket and tarp usually. This is just for the picture, I believe. And we build a collar. So this is the cool part, the technological part that's different than what they've done in the past. So here we have a relatively standard GPS collar. You've probably heard about them or read about them. It uploads points to the satellite, and the satellite uploads them to a website. So we're able to see the points in almost real time every 2 to 3 hours when they upload. And so, yeah, we can change how often the GPS takes locations, and we have this one set to take a location every 15 minutes because we're looking at fine scale data. So this is just the base collar, and then we modify it to our own needs. So we have an accelerometer, which we can talk more about this at the end if people are interested in it, but I don't want to spend too much time on it now. It's a really cool device. Basically, it measures the force of gravity, and it's the same type of device that's in your phone that allows your phone, if you're looking at it in portrait mode, if you turn it landscape, that's how your phone knows to rotate the screen for you. So it's the same technology happening here, and it's really cool. It's using different resistances based on mechanical pressures on a piezoelectric crystal. So it's super cool and incredibly small and very impressive. And so that's measuring basically the lynx's movement in three axes of direction, so the X, Y, and Z axes. Here we have our audio recorders, which is basically, they're from Russia. I'm pretty sure it's just a spy device, but it's pretty self-explanatory. We attach an external battery so that it lasts longer, especially in the cold weather. And then we basically cover all those electronic components with a bunch of stuff to keep the water out as much as possible. And then we heat shrink and tape it to the collar. And we also use like a moldable glue. And that's basically the gist of it. It's just a lot of intermediate steps. And we started poking holes in the audio devices because the audio was too muffled previously. So that's just what those 3 holes are. And then we have a collar ready for deployment. So we try and make it as round as possible. We add a bit of foam to the collars because they're actually, some of the lynx have, their necks are too small to fit even on the tightest hole. So we had a bit of foam just to make them a bit more one size fits all, as well as just to round out the shape a bit so that there's less or minimal abrasion on their necks, if any. So here's one of the lynx crews deploying a collar. If it's a new lynx, we put in those ear tags, which is a unique color combination, like I said. And then it's basically the collar is the gist of it, but while we have them sedated, and we have a veterinarian on call to help us, and it's in a controlled environment, we just take measurements as well and some genetic samples, as well as some fecal samples if they've pooped in the crate, basically. And yeah, so we measure their vitals regularly. So this is getting ready to put on the pulse oximeter, which is the same type of thing that you get put on your finger. It measures blood oxygen saturation and pulse. And then we take some measurements such as canine lengths. You can see they got big canines. It's also pretty cool if you can see their tongue there. It's just like a cat tongue, but the roughness is about 10 times worse. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, there's just another shot of how big their paws are. But the little brown liquid there is just a nutrient supplement that we give them so that as they're recovering, they get some immediate nutrition and hopefully recover as smooth as possible. So once they're waking up, we keep supplying them with oxygen to make sure that that they wake up smoothly. And basically we just monitor them. And then when they get their head up, like old Barb down on the bottom right there, looking pretty alert. Once they lift up their head, then we put them in a dark, quiet place and just let them recover fully on their own until they're ready to be released. Such as this. This is me releasing Al Capone. It's pretty cool. And there's a video coming up from a documentary, I believe, that was made in 2017. And so this is a lynx being released, and usually they just run off. This is pretty cool. You can see how their paws fully get flattened out before they put them down. I think it makes them kind of look like an octopus when an octopus is walking, but it's really cool when you're snow tracking them, you can see that that's just the way they walk because the prints are always perfectly pressed downwards into the snow. So going back to the lynx hair cycle that we talked about at the beginning, it can impact lynx in many ways. So it can impact, and that's from the peak to the low. All those and everything in between, it impacts the lynx in different ways. So it can impact them from the peak to the low, those differences in dispersal events. So lynx leaving the areas that they were born in or that they've been living in to go somewhere else. It can impact their home range size. So where they've normally been hanging out, it can get to a bigger territory. You can have interactions with other organisms, and those can be impacted as in prey species, so switching prey species or increased encounters with prey species. You can have interactions more or less with other lynx, so conspecifics. So in the peaks, you might impact lynx more often versus in the lows, you might interact with lynx less often, as well as interactions with other predators. So you can have, depending on other, like for example, coyotes, depending on coyote population density, you can have more or less interactions with them. And the nature of those interactions can be different depending on where you are in the cycle. Sadly, this year, with lynx numbers being quite low and hair numbers being quite low, there's a lot of lynx out there that are either starving or on the verge of starving. We had 2 coyotes kill and eat lynx this year, presumably just because the lynx were too weak to really fight back. It's a pretty rare occurrence for that to happen, but it does happen, and it has been documented to happen. So that's an example of just how interactions with other organisms can change depending on the cycle. The cycle can also impact lynx diet. So this can mean prey switching. In the highs of the hares cycle, they're going to be eating mostly hares versus as things get lower, you have individual lynx that can switch to squirrels more readily than other individual lynx. And so you can start eating squirrels as well as other birds, ptarmigan, grouse, things like that. As well as your diet can just be affected in the way that you don't eat anymore and you starve to death. So we've had multiple starvation, death by starvation examples in the past couple of years here as the hare numbers have crashed and the lynx numbers have crashed afterwards. The lynx cycle the hair cycle / lynx cycle can also impact lynx reproduction. This isn't something that we specifically look at in this recent project, but they have looked at on the Kluane project in general, and it's been documented that based on snow tracking and den investigation, I believe, that lynx will have smaller litters as well as potentially no litters at all as the hare population crashes. So our collars that we make for the past, since 2015, 2016, collect data so we can better understand most of these potential impacts that the lynx hair cycle can have. And most of these impacts are on a fine spatial and temporal scale. And again, we don't really look at reproduction, but basically that's just a fancy way of saying kind of the difference between this project and what they've done in the past is we can look at things at a fine scale in both space and time. So the GPS taking only every 15 minutes, we can really see what's happening on the spatial landscape more at a fine scale, rather than, because in technological advancements have allowed that to happen, as well as that every 15-minute interval is again more frequent than has been possible really in the past for the duration that we keep the lynx collared for, which is around 6 weeks usually. So I'm going to kind of break down the different types of data that we use here. So GPS data, just keep your eye out for this symbol in the bottom of the slides that kind of tells you that we're using GPS data. So I'm just going to look at it as well, kind of in the peak of lynx population density, which is around, like I said, 2017, 18. You're going to have stuff like this. You're going to have large scale dispersal events. So here's a lynx named Max. He started off having a home range around squirrel camp like most of our lynx do, and then went off and did this huge, I don't have the actual distance, but it's like, I think it's like 400 kilometers straight line distance. He goes up across Kluane Lake, goes up into the high country, spends some time, I'm using my finger to point here, but I need to use the mouse, spend some time around here, and then his collar died, his collar stopped working. So he had definitely settled down in this area for a little bit. But then the next year, an Alaskan research team found that lynx, found that he had ear tags that they didn't deploy. So they called us and they put out a new collar, but we confirmed that it was the same lynx based on the ear color combination. So that's a massive dispersal event. And based on this distance, I know that you guys have been having bigger and bigger lynx ears in the Haines area for the past couple of years. And that's one of the potential hypotheses for why that increase has been seen is dispersal events from areas of higher density, like in Kluane. And it kind of makes sense. The time series of it all is we in the 27-18 we have had that peak in lynx densities, and then they've dropped since then. So if we had more and more lynx dispersal events like this guy Max here, it could very much be feasible that they make it to Haines, because that's a very comparable distance. But that's just a hypothesis at this time. There's been none of our tagged lynx found in Haines. Another thing is just, and this is again from the peak, our GPS data just shows how much each of these lynx are really packed into our study area. So they have overlapping home ranges, and the home ranges are relatively small for most of them. You can see all our fun lynx names that are usually themed from year to year. So we have like children's characters and famous criminals and stuff. Yeah, you can really see how tightly they're packed in there and how they're relatively small home ranges. Versus when we move to the crash and lynx population density, which is primarily this season and this winter season and the past winter season in 2019/2020, we have a bit of a different story. So this is just from 1 year, but these are lynx that I know from being collared in previous seasons. And so this is the lynx named Radagast, and he has a companion lynx named Rogue, and they usually hang out in just this area here. And this is their home range. And usually they go into one area and spend a lot of time there and then move to another area. But this was just moving back and forth over large distances constantly throughout the season, as well as these new movements to north of the highway around Sulphur Lake here, and very new exploratory movements out to the northwest here, which is, they've never moved there. It's completely new territory. But this is the types of things that you can see in the low. They're starving for hares. They're looking for more hares. There's potentially less lynx in neighboring territories to compete with or have aggressive interactions with. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. And then here's another lynx from this past winter season that just finished, named Doe. She also has a companion lynx. And again, she normally would hang around just kind of this area here. We haven't actually called her since the first year of the project, but this is where she was in the first year. And but even so, from the beginning of the season over here to the end of the season over here, just very different types of behavior. She would go from one area to another and spend a little bit of time each place. Whereas in the end of the season, when she was presumably having a harder time finding hares, she was moving into brand new areas and not staying in those areas for very long, just a couple days at a time. So moving on to the accelerometers, which you can see this little diagram up here indicates we're using accelerometers now. So that's that little super cool device. So this basically, I'll explain how we get these signatures, we call them, later, but the axis is really fixed super tightly to the collar. So, and then the collar itself is fixed relatively tightly to the link so that it's not bouncing around a lot. So basically any movement that's happening and is recorded on the accelerometer is recorded by the, is recording the movement of the link, sorry, not the movement of anything else. So basically the movement in the 3 axes of movement give you different signatures, and basically based on field validation and snow tracking that we do later on, which I will explain, we can get specific signatures that are unique to different behaviors. So resting, for example, there's not a lot of movement. Grooming has a specific signature versus feeding, and versus running/chasing has a different signature. So these are simplifications, but I think you understand the idea of each behavior has a different signature. We also have, and if you're wearing headphones, I'd maybe turn down the volume now, but we have the audio recorders as well. And so you can have Lynx interactions and vocalizations. This is more just interesting. And Lynx pairing up and having aggressive interactions is something that we've become more interested in, but it wasn't really the main goal of the project to begin with. So here's just 2 Lynx with one of them purring. It sounds somewhat aggressive, but the one wearing the collar is purring. Oh, what did I do here? Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And stop me if you couldn't hear that. You should have been able to hear it. But so here's an aggressive interaction between 2 Lynx. There's a lot more growling. There's no purring going on. It's a very aggressive interaction, so that's pretty cool. And then you get these crazy screaming ones, which sometimes you think they might be mating, or sometimes it's an aggressive interaction, but they're very strange. Prepare yourself for this one. Trust me, when you have your headphones in and you're processing this audio data and one of those happens, it scares the Jesus out of you. And then you also just have these interesting vocalizations that they do when they're presumably by themselves. They're just little kind of noises. Kind of reminds me of Chewbacca or something. Anyway, so they are becoming more interested in these Lynx interactions, and they have been incorporated into a lot of the data, but this is just really interesting stuff, kind of objectively, I'd say. But what we were initially more interested was the Lynx chases and kills, which you can pick up from the audios. So again, watch your ears if you have earphones in, but this is a hare chase and kill. Usually if there's a bunch of running with silence beforehand, that indicates that it was a chase, so I'm just going to skip ahead. So that was what you call a successful hare chase and kill. That's the hare screaming at the end. It's pretty morbid, but also interesting. So yeah, so you can hear that kind of crashing and rumbling that has a specific audio and accelerometer signature, and then you can tell the prey based on usually the feeding duration, as well as sometimes if they vocalize. I'm going to skip this squirrel chase because you can just kind of hear the squirrel vocalizing in the background, but it's not very good. And the chewing. yeah, that was really, it's best to listen with earphones on that one. And you guys hopefully I can send that to you again. But basically that's how we tell feeding duration, is you can hear the bone crunching and the chewing of the lynx. And so based on how long the duration is another indicator of what prey species they were eating. So you might be wondering how the heck we can actually just say, just from this caller information, what the behaviors that are happening are. So that's with behavior validation, aka snow tracking, which is very fun. And it's been done a lot in the past 6 years. And basically you go along and track a lynx like we did here to this beautiful spot. What's going on here? Oh, oopsies, sorry. So yeah, and here's just some other examples of lynx tracks where you can see the toe pads a bit better because of spring snow and hard packed snow. And here's an example of snow tracking where we dropped the collar as well. So we have remote drop-offs on our collars. This is an example of Doe and her companion lynx. I didn't really have any good pictures, but I'll just describe to you here. There was 2 beds. One of them had the collar in it because that's where Doe was bedded down. And if you're at the site, you can clearly see that there's 2 sets of lynx tracks, one going to each bed and one leaving each bed, as well as we had tracked her previously, and there was consistently 2 sets of tracks weaving in and out and having 2 beds. So those are all just signs that there's a companion lynx. So some of the things that we'd be writing down in the field. So basically all the collar components have date and time recorded. So we go out in the field, we download the GPS points off the satellite, and then we go out into the field with the GPS and we go to each point, and then we start snow tracking the lynx from there. And we record what's happening at each point. And usually it's actually something, because if they're just walking, usually it just by chance you wouldn't catch a GPS point. So then at each point we write down the behavior, and then based on the GPS accelerometer and audio times, internal times, we can synchronize all those 3 types of data with our on ground, like on the site visual things that we're seeing with the snow tracking. And you can just line up all those different types of data. So the different types of things that we can see when we're snow tracking is things like ambush beds. This is not an ambush bed per se. It's kind of an ambush bed turned into an army crawl that the lynx has done. But basically ambush beds is usually they're skinnier beds rather than a proper sleeping bed. It would be rounder. They're skinnier. Sometimes you can see the foot pads kind of crouched beneath their body. And this would be something that you'd probably pick up in the accelerometer rather than the audio, because it'd be pretty silent. This is a really cool video of a squirrel technician, research technician, that got to see it. Again, the lynx named Fish stalking a gray jay. Again, you'd probably get this on the accelerometer rather than the audio because it's pretty silent. But you can see how slowly he's moving. This is a really long video, so I didn't include all of it, but eventually he does actually chase the gray jay. So that chase would be caught on the accelerometer of the collar, which he is wearing. Yeah, so it's just really cool to see how calculating they move when they're stalking. And then I'm going to try and go a bit quicker through this because I think I'm going a bit long here. So you have hare chases and kills, which are really cool. These things would be picked up by both the accelerometers and the audio recorders. This is a pretty classic example. In the top there, wherever all that spruce litter is kicked up, that's the chase. And then at the kill site here in the front of the picture, you have the hair pelt, which has been pulled off in a pretty uniform piece, which is a classic sign of a lynx kill, as well as you have the gut pile, the hair gut pile, placed very neatly, which is another classic sign. And I think there's a snowshoe hare foot as well. The lynx usually leave the feet. Here's another example. It's a bit messier. There's some blood and the gut pile's a bit messier, but I mean, obviously if there's tracks going through it as well, it also helps identify what the kill was. But yeah, again, lynx pelt in a uniform piece and lynx tracks and all that. Squirrel kills, they become more and more common as the hare numbers decline. And again, for specific lynx that individually are good at it or have learned how to do it. So the squirrel kills usually happen. This was a kind of a chase, but there's rarely a big chase involved with the squirrel kills. It's usually more of an ambush situation. This one you can see the lynx kind of jumped into the snow to get it. You can see the lynx track. This is a hind foot up in the upper right here. And then just a bit of blood. And then here's a tiny little squirrel gut pile. that you can see there. And 1 second, my dog's chewing. And yeah, so then you can see it's a little gut pile. So sometimes they'll leave that gut pile for squirrels and sometimes they won't. It depends lynx to lynx. But very cool. And then here's another example of a squirrel kill. Usually the tail will be left. This is pretty classic example. And that's usually all that will be left, plus a little bit of blood. The squirrel kills, like I said, typically are ambush kills. So oftentimes you'll find them under spruce tree, like tree wells and things like that, without much of a chase. The squirrels don't seem to really realize what the lynx are doing sometimes. There was a researcher last year who saw a lynx just wait at the bottom of a spruce tree, and a squirrel barked at the lynx for like 20 minutes. And then after 20 minutes, it just crawled down the tree, basically right into the lynx's mouth, and the lynx didn't hardly have to move. It just chomped down on the squirrel. So ambush pays off for the squirrels, it seems, or for the lynx eating the squirrels. Then we got cache sites. So this is a pretty cool one. I knew it was going to be a cache site because you can see that the lynx, all the claw marks around, has piled a bunch of snow. It's not like a coyote. They're not really hiding the fact that something is cached there, or at least not very well. But yeah, so then a lynx will come back and eat that later. I broke this one open to double check because sometimes they'll bury their poop occasionally. And this was indeed half a hair. They usually eat the top half first. These are really interesting because it can make the job of figuring out the data a bit more tricky, because if a hare just starts eating on the audio or on the accelerometer without having a chase beforehand, you don't know if it's that they found a scavenging kill or if they went back to a cache site, which usually, again, only happens really more in the peak of the hair density. But so that's when the GPS data can help, because you can come back, you can see, okay, well, the lynx was there probably eating because there was a cluster of GPS points, and then it came back, let's say 6 hours later, to the same point, and then you line that up with the audio. If there was feeding audio happening at both those times, then you can presume that that was probably a cache site. And then sometimes they get back to the cache site before you do, which is what happened here. I think it looked like it had buried it, and then it came back and ate it, and then kind of partially buried it again, and then I had undug it. And yeah, so now here's where all the grad students do some really impressive data manipulation. And like I said, they synchronize all those 3 types of data into one kind of mega data set for each lynx. And so you can have stuff like this diagram here. We have a lynx moving along. You have feeding events, like at a scavenging site here at the bottom left. And then they walk along and they're just traveling along. So there's a specific accelerometer signature for the travel. And again, this has all been validated many, many, many times by our snow tracking. So that's how they get these signatures, because we find it on the ground that this is what they are doing. We line up the times on the collar data, and this is consistently the type of signature that the collar data will show for just traveling, for example. Moves along, it has a chase that it failed there. And again, so that's a chase and a kill, but that'd be a similar signature on the audios if it was a chase that was successful. And then the grooms there for a bit, goes again and has a couple unsuccessful chases there, moves along, beds down, it seems, because there was no movement, goes along again, we have our timestamps here, and then gets a successful kill on a hare based on the feeding duration. It feeds for the 45 minutes that it usually takes to eat a hare. And then it moves on, has another chase that was unsuccessful. Then it has a fight with another lynx here. And again, that has a different signature on the accelerometer. So it's just super cool. And you can just imagine the fine scale data that we can get from this when we pool these 3 types of data together. And we have this going all the way from the peak of the cycle, or just before the peak of the hare cycle to the crash. You can just see how all this really fine scale data changes. And also, I'm sure you can imagine how it might change from individual lynx to individual lynx, which is one of the big questions. So some of the data, I'll kind of skip through this, but you can get some really cool stuff from this, like the proportion of feeding belts that are different prey items, as well as if it's stolen or if it's scavenged, and you can tell that from the audio, or you can infer it at least from the audio. You can never be 100%. As well as the average number of feeding belts per day. So again, it's usually around 1 per day. And so that's just the cool types of basic data you can get from this. And I'll try and go through this pretty quickly. But so if you're wondering still, like, what's the purpose of this? Like, what type of questions can we answer from all this? What time we got here? 45. I'm at 45 minutes, so I'll finish up. Is one of the big questions of a PhD candidate, Rachel Derbyshire, who was my boss, has how do lynx adjust their hunting behaviors as hair densities decline? So you can kind of look at that in these three ways. So kill rates, movement behaviors, and individual hunting strategies. But then when you really look at her objectives, there's some really cool stuff about changes in prey density and distribution. We know that it's not uniform. So how do that affect the lynx hunting behaviors? As well as things like investigating the mechanisms of potential competition with other predators or other lynx, and as well as like the individual lynx behavior in a non-uniform landscape and how that affects the predator-prey dynamics themselves. So basically, how the lynx in turn can affect the lynx hair cycle. And then real quick, I think it'd be a shame to not talk about hares a bit more. So at the end of last winter, coronavirus happened, as we all know. So silver lining, I got to be stuck in Kluane for the whole summer and have it pretty much all to myself, which was very nice, and I was lucky. And I was working on hares. And so this is the only picture I have of a hair collar, but we use similar technology for the hair collars, and we retrieve them when there's a mortality, when the hair gets killed by a predator. But they have a VHF beacon and a smaller GPS and a smaller accelerometer, so we can't deploy them for as long, but we have to make them light for the hares because they're smaller. So there's really cool work going on with baby hares. This is a leveret, they're called. It's insanely cute. And basically, so there's lots of cool questions. So Lee Scholl is a master student. He's looking at maternal care and how that changes throughout the cycle. So for example, snowshoe hare moms, he's found out with all this new technology data, fine scale data, that they invest a lot less time into their offspring as the hair numbers crash. So again, that affects the lynx because that just kind of exacerbates the crashing of the hair population, because it means that there's a lot less juvenile offspring surviving. They're all going to get eaten because the mom's around with them and is not putting nearly as much effort into helping raise them. Also, another master student, Sam Soniga, looking more at variability of the adult traits from the peak to the decline of the cycle. So there's some super cool stuff. 2020, last summer, this was the summer I was collecting data. KDE just means that the hair home range. So you can see that the home range of the hares is skyrocketed as the populations of hares have crashed. So again, that could impact the lynx because they're going to be harder to find on the landscape because they're not really hanging out in specific areas, and they're just more sparse and they're moving around a lot more, less densely packed in there. As well as things like vigilance. So the accelerometers can tell things like this, which is really cool. So when a hare's head is down, it's inferred that the hare is feeding, versus when the hare's head is up and looking like left to right and looking around, the accelerometers can tell you that that's what's happening. And again, we validate that based off of direct observations. And you can see the orange dots there, that's the decline. And the vigilance time for the hares is way more per hour than in the peak. So they have to be way more cautious in the decline, or they are way more cautious in the decline than they are in the peak, which would again make it much harder for a lynx to hunt them because they're much more vigilant. And so I ripped through that last bit, but I wanted to leave time for questions. Here's some cool pictures of wolves and wolverines at our traps. And yeah, any questions? Sorry for speeding through it at the end.
That was amazing, Liam. And I'm sure we have a ton of questions. And I just want to open it up to the kids from the Kluane school. If anybody from Kluane has kids or teachers has questions, because they might need to go on to another class, or the rest of us need to leave. I think us grown-ups have a little more free time. So go ahead, Kluane.
Hi, this is Tracy in Kluane. I asked the kids if they had any questions, but they found it very interesting. And I definitely learned some new things today about bobcats and the relationship with hares. Do you have a question, Edgar? Okay, anyone else have a question? They don't have many questions. Wait. one of my students is saying he liked the sounds.
That's awesome.
And because we've never heard them before. And what I learned was about the cache and the marks, because we did study, animal tracks. And so what to look for. And it was interesting about the squirrels, because we were just out this morning observing some squirrels around trees and tree wells. So somebody said they saw a lynx. I think Justina did. And yeah, Helly, where did you see a lynx?
26 miles.
At 26 miles. So, and behind their fence. So we're spotting them, and it's amazing the work that you're doing. And I thank you so much for sharing with the class.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad the Lynx audio is very cool. So I'm glad that kids also think it's cool, because I think it's cool. And yeah, that's great that you guys are.
Something to say here. Hold on.
Oh yeah.
Hello. Yes, no, I really appreciate it, because one night it was like 11 o'clock at night, and it was screaming. It was so crazy, but I was so afraid. And now I understand it was this animal. It was making that noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty spooky when you're out in the woods and you hear some lynx screaming at each other. You don't know what the heck's happening.
Yeah, I was feeling like somebody was
Being murdered.
being murdered.
But then also, it's just interesting, the cycle, the 10-year cycle, the chart that you showed, that the increase of the hares and, the lynx, and the decrease, and how important, this, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, the coexistence of animals, and how important it is for them to continue to exist. So thank you for your work, and thank you for sharing with us. And I wish I could see those northern lights. I'm always asleep.
Yeah, you just gotta get up in the middle of the night to pee. That's when I always find them. It's by accident.
Thank you, Liam. And thank you, Jessica, for bringing him into our school. We really appreciate it. Hopefully it can continue in the future.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I'll have to stop by if the border ever reopens. I'll be sure to head to Kluane and Haines.
Yes, thank you. And if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna leave the presentation, or we can wait 5 more minutes, but otherwise, if you were gonna wrap it up, I'm just gonna say goodbye.
Hey Liam,
Awesome.
this is Eric. This is Eric Hart. I'm the other teacher at Kluane. I had some questions.
For sure.
What's the biggest thing they've learned over the last 5 years, that something new?
I would say it's, whoopsies, what did I do there? The interesting thing is, well, first of all, the hair, I mean, I know this is a Lynx presentation, but I would say personally, and from talking to people, that the hair work has actually been probably some of the most novel findings of this project, like that maternal investment in the home ranges, because I think it's been a technological thing. The Lynx themselves, the data set is so massive. It's funny, talking to people, there's been a more and more, I think individually, a lot of the people that come up here are interested in how much the lynx aren't solitary. Like, a lot of them have companions, but that, as you talk to people who've been around for a while, that's not really a new thing, particularly in the decline. But even though it seems like it's been going on for a long time, the data set for the lynx is so massive that basically there hasn't really been that much done with it yet. Like, all this whole process in this slide here, it takes a long time. So basically, it'll be probably a couple more years before like major findings come out of it, I guess is the best answer I have for that. Okay.
And what's the largest prey that a lynx has been known to take down, and then probably what's the smallest prey that they commonly feed on?
Yeah, my answers to both those things are not based on my research. Half of it's from talking to Liz, but lynx have been known to mouse for voles and mice, kind of like the same way foxes do. They'll pounce into the snow, but you need a lot of mice to get enough meals for lynx, obviously. And the biggest thing, I mean, they scavenge, like they'll scavenge on bison and they'll scavenge on other lynx and they'll scavenge on anything, particularly in the low. But I've seen a video of a lynx taking down a mule deer, like an alive mule deer, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, it's pretty standard that it's snowshoe hare and squirrels is kind of the standard procedure. But it is interesting, just when you think about the biomass aspect of it, is when the lynx that do switch to squirrels as the hare's numbers start to decline, you could just do a basic calculation of a squirrel is usually around like 300 grams or something like that, versus a hare can be around 2 kilograms. So the number of squirrels that you would need to get per day, if you're getting around a hare per day to maintain your body condition, is they're just working a lot harder, and even more so if you're hunting mouse and bulls, right? So,
right,
pretty cool.
Do lynx ever hunt in pairs? I might have missed a couple of things you said because I had to walk out of the room. But do they ever hunt in pairs, or are they always solitary hunters?
Yeah, so that's some of the cool stuff with again, it's not necessarily new information, but they have like video evidence from some of the trail cameras on this project, and they have the audios showing like that lynx will be feeding with another lynx around. Like there'll be one lynx will growl, for example, or one lynx will be eating while growling, and you can hear another lynx like low level quietly growling in the background. But so to answer your question, yes, they do hunt to some extent together. It's interesting because it's hard for us to piece together the whole thing. When you're snow tracking, you can see 2 sets of tracks and you see one chase, and potentially, it could have been the other lynx came and flushed it out and it was just walking. But when you're not there, it's hard to see exactly what happened. But so we often see 2 sets of lynx tracks at a kill site, which indicates that they were both there. So it was possibly somewhat cooperative. And then, we have video remote camera footage of lynx like taking turns eating a hare carcass. So one eats it, it goes and grooms itself, and then the other one eats it. And so you've kind of put those pieces together, and you think that they would be sharing, as well as and this is kind of an interesting question that they don't know about, and I think people are looking into doing more genetics work on the lynx companions and how they're related. Because if you're looking at it from an evolutionary standpoint, given that a lot of lynx are solitary, there's got to be some sort of advantage to hunting and to being in sharing food and stuff like that, right? If there was no advantage, you would think that they would not do that very often, versus it seems like they pair up more often when times are tough. So presumably there is some sort of advantage to it.
And what, other than humans that trap lynx, what are the predators of lynx?
So usually in the peak of the hare cycle, when lynx are healthy and in good body condition, my understanding is that nothing really is going to be eating a lynx or killing a lynx except for a human. But once you get into the decline of the cycle and you have lynx that are in poor body condition, predation events are going to be more common. So you're going to have things like the two lynx that were killed by coyotes this past season. Wolverines have been known to kill lynx, and as well as, we don't really have a ton of wolves, but wolves could also kill lynx. Bigger, healthier lynx could kill other lynx as well. So basically, just once they're in rough shape, a lot more things could kill them. But for the most part, I think almost anything that would be killing a lynx, it would be a effort to kill a healthy lynx. Like it would probably be quite the toll in terms of effort and health on the predatory animal. So I think that's why you usually would only see it in the low.
Is there overlap with mountain lions and lynx? Not too much, I imagine.
It depends on the area. Down in the south and in like northern BC and stuff, there'd be lots of overlap. In Kluane area, cougars have been seeing. There's like anecdotal sightings of cougars more and more often, but they've never been fully like caught on camera or something. But I think that's an interesting thing. In the past, I know when the project started in the 70s, they started looking at coyotes a lot more because coyotes had moved into the Kluane area sometime between the 1920s and the 1940s.
Yep.
So they were interested in seeing how how that had maybe impacted the system, the ecosystem. And so in basically the hypothesis is people are seeing more and more deer move into the Kluane area, probably because of different types of vegetation and warming seasons. So if you're seeing those types of prey move in, that usually will bring in cougars / mountain lions. And then so once that happens, it would be interesting to see the dynamics that occur between those two. They don't have a lot of overlap between competition, because cougars aren't going to be eating hares very often.
Right.
But it would still be interesting to see if cougars become more prevalent, how people want to study that.
Okay, thank you. Last question, and I think I have a pretty good answer in my brain, but I want to test it. So the 10-year cycles with the hare peaking and then the lynx peaking a year or two after, what drives the hare peaking? Are they've just overgrazed their home range and then they crash because of vegetation?
Yeah, so this is honestly this is kind of the big question, is the actual inherent drivers of the cycle. I think there's a lot of research that's been gone into it, and there's a lot of good hypotheses, but my understanding is that there's not and someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not like 100% guaranteed answer yet. But basically, I don't think the plant-driven hypothesis doesn't have a lot of support, I don't think, for the hares, because when you're out on the landscape, there's usually tons of forage available for them, even in the winter, like willows and stuff like that. There's a hypothesis that potentially the ones there could be toxins, so that in some of the plants, so that it's not really as abundant as we perceive as humans. But in terms of one of the direct drivers that I think is pretty well supported by the research is just driven solely by the lynx. So it's called a top-down control. So the lynx hunting efficiency is so high when the hare population is high, that everyone's kind of happy for a little bit, but then they can just eat so many hares that they drive the hare numbers down. And then the hare numbers continue to fall because the lynx are keeping eating them. But then what brings the hare numbers back up is basically just a relief of that hunting pressure, because as the hares become more rare on the landscape, the lynx hunting efficiency just totally drops. And that just allows the hares have 3 to 4 litters every summer, with up to 4 to 5 babies in each one. So as soon as that hunting pressure decreases on them, they can boost their population pretty quick. Right. And so that's kind of what brings them out of it. As one of the main drivers is just a lack of lynx pressure, basically.
So the lynx is like a regulator on the hare population.
Yeah. And I think my understanding is that there is other factors at play, because based on all the research, there's like little things that don't quite add up, and I'm not a scientist yet, I guess. So I can't talk to that, but the main driver, I think, is that top-down predator regulatory control.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all your answers and your presentation.
No worries. Thank you for the great questions.
So Liam, thank you so much. I actually have a couple kids here in my home office who have questions. Thanks again to the kids from Kluane for joining us. And if you have to go, then farewell. If not, feel free to stay on. And we'll get to grown-up questions here in just a second.
That's cool. Oh, my question?
Yep.
Oh, it's do wolverines add to the decline of lynx populations, like like when they compete for food?
Yeah, so there's two kind of parts to that, I guess. So it's one thing is called interference competition. So that's basically just if you have another predator that eats the same food as the lynx, that's just kind of an indirect form of competition because they're competing for the same food. And so wolverines don't really do that. Wolverines are more scavengers, so they're not really going to be hunting snowshoe hares the same way that lynx are. I don't actually know numbers wise, but it could be plausible that as lynx are becoming more poor body condition because there's not a lot of hares for them to eat, that the wolverines that prey upon those weak lynx could help continue to decline the lynx population numbers based on that predation. But for the most part, based on what I've seen, a lot of the lynx would probably die anyway of starvation, and the wolverines just kill them before that potentially. But in terms of direct competition, that'd be more something that you could see with coyotes. Coyotes eat snowshoe hare, so the coyote numbers could influence how quickly a lynx population is declining in that way, but a wolverine a bit less so.
Your question?
I have a question.
Oh, we have another question here, Liam.
For sure.
Do lynxes ever eat birds or fish?
Great question. I have no idea about fish at all. That's a really cool question. I have no idea. I think bobcats sometimes hunt fish, but I don't know about lynx. But birds, yes, there's been recorded and documented accounts of lynx eating all sorts of birds. The ones off the top of my head are ravens, or like, I think the most common ones are ptarmigan and grouse. They can actually somewhat survive off those, but I've seen them eat pine grosbeaks, gray jays, and I've heard about ravens as well. And I think there's quite a few other, any type of ground bird, like any other type of grouse, there's probably been accounts of them eating those as well.
Okay. Is there very many sexual dimorphism between the males and the females of the lynx?
Yeah, not too much. Great word, by the way. That's very impressive. Not really. So unless you have a lynx immobilized or sedated like we do, and you can check out their genitals, there's no real easy way to determine a male lynx from a female lynx. With the or you can look at mass, but their mass is not really diagnostic. It's just an indicator. Like I said at the beginning, typically, these aren't hard numbers. This is just my experience. A male would be closer to like 10 to 14 kilograms versus a female would be 8 to 12 kilograms. So just a little bit smaller on average.
Thank you so much, Liam. Should we move on to questions from other guests, grown-ups here? Feel free to just unmute yourself and jump right in.
The kids asked all the good questions.
Yeah, this is Tom. I had a question.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so down here in Haines, when we see lynx in abundance, is that, I think you mentioned it's due to the hare population crash in the Yukon, but do you think lynx are establishing a population here in the Chilkat Valley?
Yeah, great question. And so that's kind of why I've had many conversations with Liz about this, because I think it's super interesting. And I honestly, I have no idea, because yeah, it's an area that I don't really know very well. Based on what kind of Liz has told me about this pretty marked increase in the past couple of years, it seems more likely due to that dispersal event. But in terms of whether or not they would be able to stick around, I don't know enough about the prey densities in the Chilkat Valley to answer that. But I feel like that would be one of the main factors, is whether or not you could have a lynx sustain itself on hares. And if hares don't cycle in the same way as well, that could impact them. Yeah, again, you could maybe maintain like a lower level population like they do in the southern territories or provinces, I mean. But I think that's kind of the main factor, as well as interesting to think just historically and evolutionarily, if a lynx population had not established there already in terms of like a steady lynx population, what the reasons for that would be. And I don't know what those are, but if they were prey related or something, then it'd be pretty interesting to think about why they haven't been able to stick around, and if it has changed, why they would maybe be able to stick around now. But yeah, I can't really answer that. But it is very interesting.
Thank you.
Become established at a Delta?
This is Eric. I have a question. Are the pairs of lynx typically male, female, or are they same sex, or do you not know?
Great question. Yeah. So this is another thing that I've definitely thought about a lot and had some conversations with people about. In our experience, there's 4 female pairs that we have in our study area that we know about, and one of them used to be a triplet. So it was probably, and that one was definitely a female offspring. So there was 2 adult females that would hang around, and then the next year there was a 3rd one with them, and she was still pretty small, like subadult. So but yeah, so female is definitely the most common. Last year, this year, we finally confirmed that our one male Radagast, his companion, we knew independently that a female and a male tagged lynx each had a companion, and then we weren't able to confirm until this year based off camera data that because they were never, collared at the same time, but we were figured out by camera data this year that they were in fact companions, and that's the only male-female companion pair that I know of in our study area. But I think there's been documented pictures elsewhere in the Yukon suggesting that it was male-female pair based off like genitalia. But it is really interesting, and that's why I think there's a push to do the genetic side of this, is because I think you could open up a whole new can of worms about kind of the evolutionary advantages and disadvantages of being in pairs or in groups if you knew the genetic relationships between the individuals. Because presumably that's kind of, there's a theory about that where if it's you're worried about your own survival, but if you can pass on your genes through a relative who also shares your genes, then you're also kind of proliferating your own genes in a way. So that'd be really interesting, and I think that is where the project should hopefully end up going. But it's pretty cool. And then male, it's also just that dynamic. Yeah, you would presume that those male females are probably siblings, but it's you can't say for sure. But we have not seen any male companions, which is also just interesting. They seem to be more solitary. Anybody else?
Are you still with us, Liam?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did it cut out? Yeah. I was just wondering if anyone else had questions.
Yeah. I don't really have a question. My husband's here, and he's been observing lynx and lynx tracks in the Upper Valley for the last going on 20 years now, and we've talked to a lot of people in the Upper Valley who've observed lynx here for a very long time, and I think there's a lot of difference between the Upper Valley and down closer to the coast. Maybe a more stable hare population and better habitat in general, but anyway, we both would be very excited to see a cross-border collaboration study to see, both the genetics and just the population dynamics of lynx in this area. So thanks so much for sharing your research, and definitely keep us in mind for future projects.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully, yeah, if it's me or if it's someone else, someone hopefully can take on such a project. I think it'd be really cool. Especially, yeah, I think just because even if it's not individual lynx that have moved out here, with the genetics, you can get ideas of where lynx have come from, and like in terms of pedigrees and stuff like that. So just to confirm, were you saying that the Upper Valley you think has more of a stable lynx hare population?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah, the habitat's much better.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, hi, this is Nicholas. I'm the husband that Jessica was referring to. Excuse me. Basically the upper part of the Chilkat Valley, it's really not a temperate rainforest anymore. It has enough variety of different climatic factors that sort of all converge that together create, you know, I guess a synergistic effect, you could say, but basically combined, it creates a pretty different ecology in the upper part of the Chilkat Valley. It's quite distinct from when you're down by the coast in the classic temperate rainforest fjordland area.
Yeah.
And as a result, the habitat for snowshoe hares is a lot different. And so the forest is much more open in the upper valley. The mix of species is, the total mix of all species identified might seem similar to what you'd get down, say, by the coast, but the abundance of different species, the size and the spacing is quite a bit different. And so, but the end result is we do see snowshoe hare sign here every year. Sometimes some years more, there's peaks and there's lows, but they're definitely resident here all the time. And I think lynx are as well, although sometimes in lower numbers, and they've been higher in recent years. But I don't doubt that some of them are dispersing down from the interior. You know, the lowest pass between the Tatshenshini and the Chilkat Valley is only 2,800 feet high through the Kelsaw. And so it's pretty easy for them to move through there, I'm sure, which would be another neat thing to check out, like how much, like how abundant do they get when they're, say, up near the tree line? You know, if the hares are in the sort of subalpine Krumholtzy areas, are the lynx, you know, pushing that boundary up toward the tree line? Are they coming down into the Kelsaw and the Chilkat Valley in those areas or whatever? But it would be really cool to figure out the genetics, both like the parentage of lynx that maybe are resident here and reproducing here. Are they descended from lynx in the Kluane area or elsewhere? But also how many new animals are filtering down through over the past too would be interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's also, it would line up pretty well, because I know that one of the PhD students is looking at like possible dispersal routes and to find out the habitat corridors that the lynx would be using more often than not for those dispersal routes. I think that's tough because I don't know when the lynx are most likely to disperse, but because we don't have lynx collared all year round, a lot of times next winter you trap again, and if you don't catch a lynx, you don't know if it died or if it's just dispersed. So we don't know unless someone else retraps it later. So that's kind of the tough part, but it would be really cool if we get more dispersal events that are with collared animals to see what those kind of valuable corridors are. And additionally, yeah, just with your point, with that being a transitionary zone, I think it would be really interesting, because a lot of this project is trying to understand, it's called, the fancy word is heterogeneity, but patchiness basically in the landscape. And that's in many forms: patchiness in prey distributions, patchiness in vegetation species and distributions, and topography, all that stuff. Is figuring out the dynamics of these cycles and of these dynamics in those non-uniform patchy environments. But the thing is, in my opinion, you know, the Kluane study area where we are is non-uniform for sure, definitely, but on a relatively micro scale, all things considered. So if you were able to even just go into the upper part of the Chilkat Valley and expand the research into that area, you're getting a more actually substantially, you know, on a macro scale, different environment. And I feel like if you could expand it to that and get lynx collared in that area, you'd be getting that patchiness and that heterogeneity on a larger scale than we currently have, which could be cool to answer some of these questions about, yeah, how they adapt to different environments and different prey densities and stuff.
Yeah. Thanks. That's really interesting.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. These are great questions.
All right, well, we can leave it open for one more minute and see if somebody else jumps in.
Okay. I expected like a big stumper of a question from Liz, but she's probably saving them for later. She doesn't want to embarrass me.
Liam, I heard you. It's Liz. Thank you very much for doing that. We will talk for everybody. This will be continued at many levels.
Awesome.
So Thanks for taking the time. I know you're real busy.
That's okay. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, huge thanks, Liam. And thanks again to Kluane School for spurring this idea, Takshanook Watershed Council for partnering with us, Liz and Liam and everyone who joined us. So I guess no further questions. We'll just clap you off the screen.
Awesome.
Thanks again, Liam.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. This was an awesome time.